A Hell's Angel biker saw an old couple rebuilding after the storm. Then he said, "Stop, I got this." The storm had taken everything from Harold and Betty Morrison. Their roof, their porch, half their life savings, scattered in the wind. At 78 and 75 years old, they stood in the middle of the wreckage of their home where they'd lived for 40 years. Harold's hands, which hurt from arthritis, shook as he tried to lift a fallen beam that was twice as heavy as he could handle. Betty swept broken glass with a kitchen broom, tears mixed with dirt on her weathered cheeks. The rumble of a Harley-Davidson motorcycle cut through the morning silence. Marcus Steele Rodriguez, wearing a leather vest with Hell's Angels colors, pulled over and looked at the destruction. The town knew him by reputation, fights, arrests, a man to fear and avoid. But watching Harold struggle with debris, something changed in Steele's chest. He turned off the engine, removed his jacket, and walked toward the couple. Harold looked up, not sure whether to run or stay. What happens when the most feared man in town becomes an unlikely protector? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Steele's boots crunched on broken glass as he walked toward the elderly couple. Harold automatically stepped in front of his wife. His shaking hands gripped a broken piece of wood like a weapon. The old man's eyes moved between Steele's tattooed arms and the Hell's Angels patch on his vest. "Easy there, old-timer," Steele said. His voice was surprisingly gentle. He raised his hands with his palms open. "Just want to help." Betty looked around her husband's shoulder, studying the massive biker with curiosity rather than fear. Something about Steele's posture, relaxed, non-threatening, told her this wasn't the monster the town whispered about. "We don't need any trouble," Harold said. His voice cracked with exhaustion and stress. Steele looked around at the destruction. The tornado had ripped through their property like a giant's fist, leaving their modest ranch house a skeleton of broken beams and scattered memories. A lifetime of belongings lay twisted in the yard. Furniture, photographs, Betty's grandmother's china scattered across the mud like forgotten dreams. "Looks like you've got enough trouble already," Steele observed. He walked over to where Harold had been struggling with a heavy beam. Without asking permission, he bent down and lifted it easily. Carrying it to a neat pile he began forming. "Where do you want the usable lumber?" Harold blinked in confusion. We can't pay you." Didn't ask for payment. Steele continued working. His movements were efficient and practiced. He handled their belongings with unexpected care, setting aside items that could be saved, organizing debris with military precision. Betty watched this leather-clad stranger treat their possessions with more respect than the insurance adjuster had shown. When Steele found her jewelry box beneath a fallen dresser, he dusted it off gently before placing it on the porch steps. "You know about construction?" Harold asked. His suspicion slowly gave way to desperate hope. "Some." Steele examined a partially collapsed wall, running his hands along the frame. "This can be saved. Foundations solid. You built this place to last. 43 years ago. Did most of the work myself." Pride crept into Harold's voice despite their circumstances. Steele nodded approvingly. "Shows good bones. Just need some muscle to put it back together." From across the street, neighbors looked through curtains and screen doors. Word traveled fast in small towns, and the sight of Hell's Angels colors in their quiet neighborhood had everyone on edge. Mrs. Patterson from next door stood on her porch with her cell phone in hand, probably calling Sheriff Clayton. Steele noticed the audience but continued working. He'd spent years being the villain in everyone else's story. Today felt different. Today he had a chance to be something else. "Betty, dear, maybe you should call the sheriff," Harold whispered loud enough for Steele to hear. Steele paused in his work. "Your call, old-timer. But I'm thinking your roof won't fix itself while we wait for the law to show up." Betty stepped forward, surprising both men. "What's your name, son?" "Steele." "That your real name?" A ghost of a smile crossed Steele's weathered face. "Marcus Rodriguez. Steele's what my brothers call me." "Well, Marcus," Betty said, emphasizing his given name, "would you like some lemonade? It's hot out here." Harold stared at his wife as if she'd lost her mind. Steele looked equally surprised by the offer of hospitality. "Yes, ma'am. That would be nice." As Betty headed toward their damaged kitchen, Steele removed his leather jacket and draped it over his motorcycle seat. The simple gesture revealed the man beneath the intimidating exterior, just someone willing to help neighbors in need. Harold watched Steele work with growing amazement. The biker's movements were precise, economical, purposeful. He sorted through debris with the eye of someone who understood construction, separating materials by type and usability. "You do this kind of work before?" Harold asked. "Here and there." Steele didn't elaborate, but his expertise was obvious. He'd found things Harold had missed: undamaged electrical fixtures, usable plumbing, architectural details worth saving. Betty returned with a pitcher of lemonade and 3 glasses. The sight of the town's most feared resident sitting on her porch steps, accepting hospitality from the couple he was supposedly threatening, would fuel gossip for months. "Thank you, ma'am." Steele accepted the glass gratefully. The simple courtesy in his voice contradicted everything the town believed about him. As they sat in the shade of Harold's battered truck, an unlikely peace settled over the devastated property. For the first time since the storm, Harold felt something other than despair. And Steele discovered that being someone's a sign of hope felt better than being their worst nightmare. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as Steele worked alongside Harold, moving debris with organized precision. Betty emerged from the house carrying a water-soaked photo album. Her face was marked with grief as she peeled apart pages that documented decades of family memories. "Oh, Harold," she whispered, holding up a photograph of their wedding day. The image was blurred beyond recognition, the colors bleeding together like watercolor tears. Steele paused in his work, watching the elderly woman's shoulders shake with quiet sobs. Without a word, he walked over and gently took the album from her hands. "May I?" Betty nodded, too heartbroken to speak. Steele sat on the porch steps and began carefully separating each photograph, laying them flat on clean boards to dry. His massive hands moved with surprising delicacy, treating each image as if it were precious crystal. "This one's salvageable," he said, holding up a photo of a young Harold in military uniform. "And this one," a picture of Betty holding a baby, their son, probably, before he moved to California and visits became Christmas cards. Harold stopped his own work to watch this tattooed stranger handle their memories with more care than most people showed their own possessions. "You don't have to do that. Family photos are important," Steele said simply. "Lost mine in a fire years back. Wish someone had helped me save them." The admission hung in the air, revealing a glimpse of Steele's own losses. Betty sat beside him on the steps, and together they worked through the damaged album. For every photograph beyond saving, Steele found 2 that could be restored. "Tell me about this one," Steele said, pointing to a faded image of Harold and Betty standing in front of a half-built house. "That's this place." Betty smiled through her tears. 1979, Harold was so proud, building our first home with his own hands. Good craftsmanship shows, Steele observed. That's why the foundation held. Across the street, curtains twitched as neighbors watched the unlikely scene. Mrs. Patterson had indeed called Sheriff Clayton, but the lawman was dealing with storm damage throughout the county. The sight of Hell's Angels colors in their neighborhood would have to wait. Harold resumed his work but found himself stealing glances at Steele. The biker moved like someone used to physical labor, but there was something else, a precision that spoke of training beyond construction work. "You serve?" Harold asked, nodding toward Steele's careful, economical movements. Steele looked up from the photo album. "Army, long time ago." "Which unit?" "Engineers. You?" "Marines. Vietnam." Something shifted between the two men, recognition that went beyond age and appearance. They shared the invisible bond of those who'd worn the uniform, who understood duty and brotherhood in the weight of memories that civilian life couldn't quite erase. "Semper Fi," Steele said quietly. "Ah, oorah," Harold replied, using the Army response with newfound respect. Betty watched this exchange with growing understanding. Her husband had rarely spoken about his service, but she recognized the change in his posture, the way his shoulders straightened slightly. He'd found something he hadn't expected in this leather-clad stranger, a brother in arms. As the afternoon wore on, word spread through the small town. The Morrisons' house had been hit hard, but they were getting help from an unlikely source. Opinions varied wildly. Some neighbors were scandalized, others curious, a few cautiously optimistic. Tom Bradley, who owned the hardware store, drove by twice to get a better look. He'd been planning to offer Harold his services, probably at high storm recovery prices. The sight of free labor complicated his calculations. "He's actually helping them," Bradley muttered to his wife. "Not robbing them blind or causing trouble, just helping." Steele organized the salvageable materials with military efficiency. Usable lumber in one pile, damaged but repairable items in another, total losses in a third. He turned chaos into order, giving Harold and Betty their first clear picture of what could be saved. "We can't afford to rebuild," Harold said quietly, voicing the fear that had haunted them since the storm. Steele looked up from his sorting. "Insurance?" "Some, not enough. And we're too old to get a big loan." Steele continued working, but Betty could see him thinking. She'd raised 3 children and taught elementary school for 30 years. She knew the look of someone solving a problem. "Marcus," she said, using his real name deliberately. "Why are you doing this?" Steele paused, a piece of broken siding in his hands. The question was simple, but the answer was complicated. He thought about the call he'd received that morning from his probation officer, the community service hours he still owed, the reputation that followed him everywhere. "Maybe it's time I gave back instead of just taking," he said finally. "Maybe it's time I was someone different." Betty reached over and patted his arm, a gesture that would have seemed impossible that morning. "I think you already are, son." The rumble of motorcycle engines announced their arrival before they came into view. Steele looked up from the lumber pile he'd been organizing and grinned. 3 Harley-Davidsons turned into the Morrisons' driveway, their chrome gleaming in the late afternoon sun. Harold instinctively moved closer to Betty. His military training kicked in as he assessed potential threats. 3 more Hell's Angels meant 3 times the trouble in his estimation. "Easy, old-timer," Steele said, reading Harold's tension. "These are my brothers. They're here to help." The lead bike belonged to a compact man with graying temples and arms covered in detailed tattoos. He wore a pristine leather tool belt around his waist, the kind professionals carried. Behind him rode a massive black man whose gentle eyes contradicted his intimidating size, and a wiry Hispanic man with calloused hands that spoke of decades working with them. "Steele called for backup," the first man said, extending his hand to Harold. "Name's Patch. I'm an electrician when I'm not riding." Harold hesitantly shook the offered hand, surprised by the firm but respectful grip. The large black man stepped forward next. "Diesel, plumbing contractor, 30 years. This pretty lady must be Mrs. Morrison." He tipped his baseball cap to Betty with old-fashioned courtesy. "And I'm Hawk," said the third man, studying the damaged house with a professional eye. "Carpenter and contractor. Steele says you folks could use some help getting back on your feet." Betty found her voice first. "That's very kind, but we can't afford to pay you, gentlemen." "Who said anything about payment?" Patch asked, already unloading tools from his saddlebags. "Brothers help brothers. And Steele says Mr. Morrison here is a Marine. That makes him family." Harold's skepticism wavered as he watched the three men transform from intimidating bikers into skilled tradesmen. Patch examined the electrical damage with practiced efficiency, while Diesel crawled under the house to assess the plumbing. Hawk measured and calculated, his trained eye seeing possibilities Harold had missed. "Foundation's solid," Hawk announced. "Most of the plumbing survived. Electrical needs work, but nothing we can't handle. This is totally doable." "In what time frame?" Harold asked. "Weekend," Diesel said confidently. "Maybe 2, if we take our time and do it right." Harold's mouth fell open. The contractor who'd given him an estimate the previous day had said 6 weeks minimum. Mrs. Patterson appeared at her fence, unable to contain her curiosity any longer. "Harold, is everything all right over there?" "Fine, Mrs. Patterson," Harold called back. "These gentlemen are helping us clean up." "Those are hell's angels," she hissed loud enough for everyone to hear. Patch looked up from his electrical inspection with a grin. "Yes, ma'am, we sure are. And we're about to fix your neighbor's house better than new." Steele organized his brothers with military precision. They'd all served together in different branches before finding each other in the brotherhood of bikes and leather. Their skills complemented perfectly, Patch handling electrical, Diesel managing plumbing, Hawk overseeing structural work, and Steele coordinating the entire operation. "We'll need supplies," Hawk said, consulting his notebook where he'd sketched repair plans. "Bradley's Hardware is still open," Harold offered hesitantly. "Good," Steele said. "Diesel, take the truck. Get everything on Hawk's list. Cash up front. No credit questions." Betty watched this exchange with growing amazement. These men weren't asking for anything except the chance to help. They discussed materials and methods with professional competence, treated her and Harold with genuine respect, and organized their effort like a military operation. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, Steele quietly, while the others worked. Steele considered the question while watching his brothers transform chaos into organized progress. "Remember I told you about losing my family photos in a fire?" Betty nodded. "House fire took everything I owned, so I was overseas, couldn't get back in time. When I came home on leave, neighbors had already cleared the lot. Nothing left but ashes and regret. I'm sorry. Point is, nobody helped. Everyone felt bad, but nobody actually did anything. I figured maybe it was time someone did something, instead of just feeling bad." As evening approached, the transformation was already dramatic. What had been chaos that morning now showed clear organization and purpose. The Hells Angels had turned Harold and Betty's disaster into a manageable project with visible hope for completion. Harold pulled Steele aside as the others prepared to leave. "Marcus, I owe you an apology. I judged you based on appearances." "Most people do," Steele replied without bitterness. "Sometimes they're right. Today they're not. What time tomorrow?" "Sunrise. We'll have this place livable by Sunday night." As the motorcycles roared to life and disappeared down the street, Harold and Betty stood in their yard, surveying the day's progress. For the first time since the storm, their home looked like something that could be saved. "Well," Betty said, taking her husband's arm, "this has been quite a day." Harold nodded, still processing everything that had happened. Quite a day indeed. Dawn broke with the sound of Harley engines rumbling into the Morrison driveway. Harold, who'd been awake since 5 a.m., nursing his coffee and wondering if yesterday had been some kind of stress-induced hallucination, watched through his kitchen window as the 4 bikers arrived with military punctuality. Steele carried a thermos and what looked like hand-drawn blueprints. Diesel hauled a toolbox that probably weighed more than Betty. Patch had electrical supplies strapped to his bike, and Hawk transported lumber with the careful precision of someone who understood the value of straight boards. "Morning, Mr. Morrison," Steele called out. "Hope you don't mind, but Diesel here drew up some plans last night." Harold stepped onto his damaged porch, amazed that these men had spent their evening thinking about his problems. Diesel spread the blueprints across a makeshift table, revealing detailed renovation plans that put professional contractors to shame. "See, the way I figure it," Diesel explained, his massive finger tracing structural lines. "We don't just patch this place back together, we improve it. Reinforce the frame, upgrade the electrical, maybe add that back deck Mrs. Morrison mentioned wanting." "I mentioned that?" Betty asked, appearing with a plate of fresh biscuits. "Yesterday, when you were talking about how you used to sit outside in the evenings before the storm took your porch." Betty's eyes misted. She'd said that to Steele while they were saving photographs, never expecting anyone to remember such a casual comment. Hawk examined the foundation with professional thoroughness. "Concrete's solid, but we can strengthen these floor joists, add some cross-bracing. This house will stand up to anything nature throws at it." "You really know what you're doing," Harold observed, studying the detailed plans. 23 years in construction before I started writing full-time," Hawk replied. "Diesel's got his contractor's license. Patch ran his own electrical business for 15 years. We all learned trades before we learned to ride." Steele unrolled additional drawings. "These are the electrical upgrades. Your current system's from the 70s. Still works, but we can bring it up to modern code while we're rebuilding." Modern code means more outlets, better lighting, proper safety protection in the bathrooms and kitchen, Patch added. "Safety stuff that'll give you peace of mind." Harold felt overwhelmed by their competence. "Gentlemen, this is far more than we discussed. The cost..." "Cost is our concern," Steele interrupted gently. "You just worry about healing up and taking care of your lady." "But why?" Harold pressed. "This is thousands of dollars worth of work and materials." Diesel looked up from his measurements. "Mr. Morrison, you served your country. You raised a family, paid your taxes, been a good neighbor for 40 years. Sometimes the system fails good people. When it does, the rest of us need to step up. Besides," Patch added with a grin, "we like a challenge. This is more interesting than hanging around the clubhouse drinking beer and arguing about motorcycle settings." Betty watched these rough men handle her damaged home with incredible care. They discussed structural requirements and electrical capacity with the casual expertise of professionals. but they also noticed details that mattered to her, preserving the original hardwood, maintaining the character of rooms where she'd raised her children. "Can you really do all this in a weekend?" she asked. "Weekend for the major work," Hawk confirmed. "Finishing touches might take a few more days, but you'll be sleeping in your own bed Sunday night." "With better lighting than you've ever had," Patch added. Steele organized the work with military efficiency. Each man had specific responsibilities, but they moved as a coordinated team. Harold found himself pressed into service as assistant and advisor, his military experience making him valuable for planning and logistics. "You were engineering corps?" Steele asked, watching Harold calculate material requirements with practiced ease. "Combat engineers. Built bridges, cleared obstacles, occasionally blew things up when the situation called for it. Good training for construction work," Diesel observed. "Engineers think about problems differently than regular infantry." As the morning progressed, Harold discovered unexpected satisfaction in working alongside these skilled men. His body protested. 78 years and arthritis made physical labor challenging, but his mind felt sharper than it had in years. Betty established herself as the team's logistics coordinator, providing coffee, water, and sandwiches, while managing the growing collection of neighbors who found reasons to walk past the Morrison property. "Mrs. Patterson called 3 times already," Betty told Steele during a coffee break. "She's convinced you're all casing the neighborhood for future burglaries." Steele chuckled. "What did you tell her?" "That if you wanted to rob people, you probably wouldn't start by rebuilding their houses." The morning flew by with remarkable progress. These men worked with the focused intensity of professionals who took pride in their craftsmanship. Harold watched them transform yesterday's disaster into today's organized reconstruction project. And for the first time since the storm, he began to believe his home could actually be saved. Sheriff Clayton's patrol car rolled slowly down Maple Street, its occupants studying the unusual scene at the Morrison property. Word had reached him through multiple channels: Mrs. Patterson's concerned calls, Tom Bradley's puzzled reports from the hardware store, and his own deputy's observations during routine patrol. 4 Harley-Davidsons parked in an elderly couple's driveway represented exactly the kind of situation that made small-town law enforcement complicated. Clayton pulled into the driveway behind the motorcycles. His hand instinctively checked his radio as he surveyed the organized chaos of construction activity. The Hells Angels were supposed to be trouble: fights, drugs, intimidation. They weren't supposed to be rebuilding houses with professional competence. "Afternoon, Sheriff," Steele called out, not pausing in his work installing new support beams. "Steele," Clayton nodded wearily. They had history: several arrests, court appearances, probation violations. Nothing major, but enough to establish mutual weariness. Harold emerged from the house carrying a level. His face brightened when he saw the sheriff. "Bill, good to see you." Sheriff Clayton and Harold Morrison had known each other for 20 years. Harold had taught high school shop class. Clayton's own son had been one of his students. "Harold, Betty, heard you folks had some excitement over here." "Excitement's one word for it," Harold replied, gesturing at the reconstruction work. "These gentlemen have been helping us put things back together." Clayton studied the progress with professional suspicion. In his experience, Hell's Angels didn't provide community service without ulterior motives. "Everything voluntary here." "Harold?" "Completely voluntary," Harold confirmed. "These men have been true lifesavers. No pressure, no request for payment, no suggestions about future considerations." Steele straightened from his work, recognizing the accusation beneath Clayton's careful questions. "Sheriff, you want to check our permits, inspect our work, Run background checks. Whatever makes you comfortable. Permits? Clayton asked, surprised. Diesel produced a folder from his toolbox. Filed yesterday afternoon. Building permit, electrical permit, plumbing modification permit, all properly submitted with the county. Clayton examined the paperwork with growing confusion. Everything appeared legitimate. Proper applications, correct fees paid, work descriptions that matched what he observed. You gentlemen are familiar with permit requirements? Hawk's a licensed contractor, Patch explained. Diesel and I maintain our trade licenses even though we don't practice full-time anymore. We know the rules. Betty appeared on the porch with a pitcher of iced tea. Sheriff Clayton, would you like something to drink? It's hot out here. Thank you, Betty. Clayton accepted the glass gratefully, still trying to match his expectations with reality. Tom Bradley's pickup truck pulled up to the curb. The hardware store owner had been driving past the Morrison property every few hours, unable to believe what he was seeing. Bill. Bradley nodded to the sheriff, then addressed the bikers. I've got the rest of your order loaded. That's $800 worth of materials you boys have purchased in 2 days. Appreciate you staying open late for us, Steele replied, signing Bradley's receipt. Clayton watched money change hands. Cash, no questions asked, no complaints about prices. Whatever these bikers were up to, it involved significant personal investment. Mr. Morrison, Clayton said carefully, you sure you're comfortable with this arrangement? Harold set down his level and looked directly at the sheriff. Bill, these men have done more for us in 2 days than anyone else has done since the storm hit. They've treated Betty with respect, worked harder than men half their age, and asked for nothing in return except the chance to help. Harold's right, Betty added. Marcus and his friends have been perfect gentlemen. Clayton noticed Betty's use of Steele's real name, the obvious comfort she displayed around these supposedly dangerous men. Her judgment carried weight. 30 years of teaching had given her excellent instincts about people. A second patrol car arrived, letting out Deputy Martinez, who'd been monitoring radio chatter about the situation. Martinez was young, ambitious, and inclined to see problems where none existed. Sheriff, we've had multiple calls about this situation. Mrs. Patterson says these bikers are intimidating residents. Which residents? Harold asked sharply. Well, Mrs. Patterson specifically mentioned. Mrs. Patterson hasn't set foot off her porch since these gentlemen arrived, Betty interrupted. She's been watching through her curtains and making assumptions. Steele wiped sweat from his forehead and addressed both officers directly. Sheriff, Deputy, we understand this looks unusual. 4 Hell's Angels rebuilding an elderly couple's house doesn't fit anyone's expectations. But sometimes people surprise you. Why here? Clayton asked. Why these folks? Because they needed help, and we were in a position to provide it. Steele answered simply. Sometimes it's that straightforward. Deputy Martinez remained skeptical. What about your probation requirements, Rodriguez? Community service hours current. On track with all requirements, Steele replied. This is personal time. Personal choice. Clayton studied the scene one more time, the professional quality work, the obvious respect between the bikers and the elderly couple, the complete absence of anything remotely criminal. Carry on, gentlemen, he said finally. Harold, Betty, you call if you need anything. As the patrol cars departed, Harold turned to Steele. Marcus, thank you for handling that diplomatically. Sheriff's just doing his job, Steele replied. Can't fault a man for that. Evening shadows stretched across the Morrison property as the day's work wound down. Steele found Harold sitting on the newly repaired porch steps, nursing a beer and staring at the progress they'd made. The house was beginning to look like a home again. "Mind if I join you?" Steele asked, settling his large frame onto the steps beside the older man. "Of course not." Harold handed him a beer. They sat in comfortable silence, two men appreciating the satisfaction of physical work well done. "Marcus," Harold said finally, "I owe you more than I can ever repay." "Don't owe me anything." Harold studied Steele's profile in the fading light. "You know, I served 3 tours in Vietnam. Thought I'd seen everything there was to see about human nature." "War will show you extremes," Steele agreed. "That it will. But today, watching you and your brothers work, it reminded me of something I'd almost forgotten." "What's that?" Harold reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside, nestled on faded silk, lay a Purple Heart medal, its ribbon worn soft by decades of handling. "July 1968, near Da Nang," Harold said quietly. "Took shrapnel from a mortar round while pulling wounded Marines out of a collapsed bunker. Spent 6 weeks in a field hospital, and then they shipped me home." Steele examined the medal with the respect of someone who understood its significance. "You saved lives." "Did my job. Point is, I learned something in that hospital. Doesn't matter what someone looks like, where they come from, what they've done before. When things get bad, you find out who people really are." Steele turned the medal over in his palm, feeling its weight. Heavy. Not the medal. The responsibility that comes with it. Harold accepted the Purple Heart back and tucked it away carefully. "Today, I saw the same thing I saw in that hospital ward. Men who step up when others need help, regardless of personal cost. We're just fixing a house, Harold." "No, son, you're fixing much more than that." Steele considered this while watching Diesel and Hawk load tools into their motorcycles. "Can I tell you something?" "Of course. I've been carrying guilt for 15 years. Things I did overseas, things I didn't do when I came back. Lost my way for a while after discharge. PTSD, among other things. Drinking, fighting, making bad choices. Brothers in the club pulled me back from the edge, but I never felt like I'd balanced the scales." Harold nodded with understanding. "Survivor's guilt. I know it well. This morning, working on your house, teaching your neighbor's kids how to use tools safely. First time in years I felt like I was building something instead of tearing it down." "That's what service teaches you," Harold said. "Sometimes the most important battles are the ones nobody sees. The quiet victories over your own demons." Betty appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel. "You men about ready for dinner? I've got pot roast and enough leftovers to feed an army." "Yes, ma'am," Steele replied, rising from the steps. "Smells incredible." "Diesel, Patch, Hawk," Betty called out. "You boys wash up. Dinner's ready." The dining room hadn't suffered much storm damage, and Betty had set her table with the good china, pieces that had survived the tornado and deserved to be used for special occasions. Steele and his brothers cleaned up at the kitchen sink, their massive hands surprisingly gentle, with Betty's delicate soap dispenser. "Been a long time since I ate a home-cooked meal," Diesel admitted, taking his seat carefully at the antique table. "Then you're in for a treat," Harold said. "Betty's been perfecting that pot roast recipe for 40 years. As they passed dishes around the table, Steele marveled at the normalcy of the moment. Yesterday, these people had been strangers who crossed the street to avoid him. Tonight, he was sharing their family dinner, included in their conversation about local politics and weather patterns. "Marcus," Betty said, "tell us about your family." Steele paused with his fork halfway to his mouth. Not much to tell. Parents died when I was young. Military became my family, then the club. No wife? Children? Had a fiancé once. Didn't work out when I came back. Changed. Betty's maternal instincts kicked in. What was her name? Sarah. She tried to understand, but I wasn't ready to be understood. Sometimes timing is everything, Harold observed. Right person, wrong moment. After dinner, Steele helped Betty clear dishes while the other men discussed tomorrow's work plan. In the kitchen, away from the others, Betty studied this imposing man who dried her dishes with such careful attention. "Marcus, can I ask you something personal?" "Sure. Do you ever think about trying again? With someone like Sarah?" Steele considered the question while polishing a wine glass. "Starting to think maybe I'm ready to be someone worth understanding." Betty smiled, recognizing the significance of his admission. "I think you already are, son." Jake Jenkins pulled his white contractor's van into the Morrison driveway Saturday morning, expecting to find the elderly couple ready to accept his services. Instead, he found 4 Hell's Angels installing new roofing with professional precision. "What the hell is this?" Jenkins muttered, slamming his van door hard enough to announce his displeasure. Steele looked down from the roof where he was securing shingles. "Morning. You need something?" "I need to know what you boys think you're doing on my job site." Harold emerged from the house carrying coffee for the work crew. "Jake, what are you talking about?" "Mr. Morrison, we had an agreement. I was supposed to start reconstruction Monday morning." "We had a conversation," Harold corrected. "No agreement, no contract, no handshake deal." Jenkins pulled out a folder thick with official-looking documents. Building permits, code compliance forms, contractor liability insurance. You can't just let any yahoo with a hammer work on your house. Diesel climbed down from his ladder, his massive frame casting a shadow over the smaller contractor. "Mr. Jenkins, I presume? I'm Diesel Washington, licensed general contractor in 3 states. These are my permits." He handed Jenkins a file folder containing properly executed paperwork. Jenkins examined the documents with growing frustration. Everything appeared legitimate and professionally prepared. "This is highly irregular," Jenkins protested. "The Morrison job was mine. I've been waiting for insurance approval for 6 weeks, Harold pointed out, while we lived in a house with no roof. "Quality work takes time, Mr. Morrison. You can't just slap materials together and call it construction." Hawk descended from the roof, his carpenter's tool belt jingling with professional equipment. "Mr. Jenkins, you're welcome to inspect our work. We're following all county building codes plus additional reinforcement standards." Jenkins studied the new roof structure with obvious surprise. The work was not only professional, it was superior to standard construction practices. Load-bearing beams showed careful engineering, moisture barriers exceeded code requirements, and the overall craftsmanship rivaled anything his own crews produced. "Where'd you get the materials?" Jenkins demanded. "Bradley's Hardware," Patch replied from inside the house, where he was rewiring electrical systems. "Paid cash, got receipts, everything's properly documented." "Tom Bradley's been waiting 6 weeks for my material order," Jenkins said accusingly. "Suddenly, he's got everything in stock for you boys." Steele wiped sweat from his forehead and addressed Jenkins directly. "Mr. Jenkins, sounds like your problem is with your supplier. Not with us. My problem is with unlicensed contractors stealing jobs from legitimate businesses." "Licensed," Diesel corrected, producing his contractor's credentials. "Current insurance. Bonded. 23 years experience." Jenkins examined Diesel's license with growing agitation. Everything was legitimate, properly maintained, completely legal. "This is still my neighborhood," Jenkins said, shifting tactics. "I've been serving these families for 15 years. They trust me." "Then maybe you should have prioritized their emergency repairs," Betty said sharply from the porch. She'd been listening to the confrontation with growing irritation. "Mrs. Morrison, insurance companies have procedures. Procedures that left us sleeping in a house with tarps for a roof, while you waited for approval on work that should have started immediately." Harold joined his wife on the porch, presenting a united front. "Jake, these gentlemen stepped up when we needed help. They've worked harder in 3 days than most crews accomplish in 3 weeks. At what cost?" Jenkins asked. "What are they really charging you for this work?" "Nothing," Harold replied. Jenkins laughed skeptically. "Nobody does this kind of work for free. What's the catch? What do they want in return?" Steele climbed down from the roof and approached Jenkins calmly. "Mr. Jenkins, sometimes people help because it's the right thing to do. No catch, no hidden agenda, no future expectations." "That's naive," Jenkins scoffed. "These men are criminals. A Hell's Angels don't do charity work." "Watch your mouth," Harold said sharply, surprising everyone with his vehemence. "These men have shown my wife and me more respect and kindness than anyone else since the storm hit. Mr. Morrison, you're making a mistake trusting these people. When something goes wrong, and it will, don't come crying to legitimate contractors for help." Jenkins gathered his unused paperwork and stalked back to his van. Before leaving, he rolled down his window and called out, "This won't pass final inspection. Code enforcement will shut you down." As the van disappeared down the street, Harold shook his head in disgust. 15 years I've known Jake Jenkins. Never seen him act like such a fool. "He's scared," Steele observed. "Scared that people might realize they don't need overpriced contractors for every little problem." "Will his threats cause problems?" Betty asked worriedly. "Let him call code enforcement," Diesel replied confidently. "Our work will pass any inspection they want to conduct." Patch emerged from the house grinning. "Besides, my cousin runs the county electrical inspection department. Family connections have their advantages." As work resumed, Harold reflected on the morning's confrontation. Jake Jenkins represented the old way of doing business. Slow, expensive, taking advantage of people's desperation. Steele and his brothers represented something different. Competence motivated by compassion rather than profit. "Harold," Steele called from the roof, "hand me that chalk line. We're about to finish your new roof." Monday morning brought an unexpected visitor to the Morrison property. County Inspector Williams arrived in his official vehicle, clipboard in hand and the grim expression of someone expecting to find code violations. Jake Jenkins had made good on his threat. Steele was installing the final section of guttering when Williams pulled up. The inspector stepped out of his truck, studying the house with professional skepticism. In his 15 years with the county, he'd seen plenty of DIY disasters masquerading as home improvements. "Good morning," Williams called out. "I'm here to inspect the construction work. Who's the contractor on this project?" Diesel appeared from around the corner, wiping hydraulic cement from his hands. "That would be me, Diesel Washington, a licensed general contractor." He handed Williams his business card and credentials. Williams examined the paperwork with surprise. He'd expected to find unlicensed handymen cutting corners to save money. Instead, he faced a legitimate contractor with impressive credentials. "Mr. Washington, I need to inspect all structural modifications, electrical work, and plumbing changes. Do you have permits? Right here. Diesel produced the permit folder, each document properly filed and fees paid current. Williams spent the next hour conducting a thorough inspection. He examined the foundation work, tested electrical connections, checked plumbing modifications, and scrutinized the new roof structure. With each test, his expression grew more puzzled. "This is exceptional work," he admitted to Diesel. "Better than most professional crews produce." "Where did you learn these techniques?" "Military Engineering Corps. Then 20 years in commercial construction before I started writing full-time." "And your crew?" "All licensed tradesmen. Patch maintains his electrical certification. Hawk's been a carpenter for 30 years. We know what we're doing." Williams completed his inspection checklist, finding 0 violations and several improvements that exceeded code requirements. The work was not only compliant, it was exemplary. "Mr. Washington, I have to ask, what's your relationship with the property owners? This level of work represents significant value." "We're helping neighbors rebuild after storm damage." "For what compensation?" "Personal satisfaction." Williams had heard that answer before, usually from contractors hiding cash payments to avoid taxes. But something about Diesel's straightforward manner suggested honesty. Harold approached from the house carrying fresh coffee for the workers. "Inspector Williams, I'm Harold Morrison, the homeowner." "Mr. Morrison, beautiful property. These gentlemen are doing excellent work. They've been true lifesavers. Our house was nearly destroyed, and insurance was taking forever to approve repairs. What's your arrangement with Mr. Washington's crew? They volunteered their time and expertise. We're incredibly grateful." Williams studied Harold's face for signs of coercion or deception. Instead, he saw genuine appreciation and relief. "Mr. Morrison, this kind of volunteer construction work is unusual. Are you certain there are no hidden costs or future obligations?" "Inspector, these men have treated my wife and me with more kindness than we've received from anyone since the storm hit. They've asked for nothing except the chance to help." Steele climbed down from the roof, recognizing the need to address official concerns directly. "Inspector Williams, I'm Marcus Rodriguez. This is my crew." Williams studied Steele's Hell's Angels colors with obvious weariness. "Mr. Rodriguez, I have to ask, what's your interest in this property?" "Saw neighbors in trouble. Had the skills to help. Seemed like the right thing to do." Jake Jenkins called our office. He suggested this work might not meet county standards. Jake Jenkins lost a job he never had. Harold interjected. "He's been giving us the runaround for 6 weeks while we lived under tarps." Williams reviewed his inspection notes one final time. Every system passed. Every modification exceeded minimum requirements. Every permit was properly filed and current. "Mr. Rodriguez, Mr. Washington, I'm signing off on all permits. This is some of the finest residential construction work I've inspected this year." "Thank you, sir," Steele replied. "We take pride in doing things right." After Williams departed, Harold approached Steele with obvious relief. "Marcus, I was worried Jenkins might cause real problems for you." "Worried about us? We can handle contractors and inspectors. I was worried about you and Betty." "What do you mean?" "If that inspection had failed, you'd be stuck with code violations and legal problems. We could walk away, but this is your home." Harold studied Steele's face, recognizing genuine concern for consequences beyond his own interests. "You really were protecting us. That's what neighbors do for each other." Betty appeared on the new front porch, admiring the completed construction work. "Harold, come see how beautiful this looks." The house was transformed. New roof, upgraded electrical and plumbing, reinforced structure, and fresh paint made it look better than before the storm. More importantly, it was home again, safe, secure, and ready for whatever weather the future might bring. "Well," Harold said, surveying the completed project, "I guess Jake Jenkins won't be bothering us anymore." "Probably not," Steele agreed. "But if he does, you know where to find us." Tuesday evening brought celebration to the Morrison household as the final touches were completed on their reconstructed home. Betty stood in her restored kitchen, tears streaming down her face as she turned on the new faucet Diesel had installed. Water flowed clean and strong, a simple miracle after weeks of makeshift plumbing. "Harold," she called, her voice thick with emotion, "come see this." Harold joined her at the sink, marveling at the gleaming fixtures and new cabinet hardware. The kitchen looked better than it had in 20 years, every detail carefully planned and expertly executed. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," he said, putting his arm around his wife's shoulders. Steele and his brothers gathered in the living room, packing tools and preparing for departure. Their work was finished, permits approved, and the Morrison home restored to better condition than before the storm. "Marcus," Betty said, entering with a plate of chocolate chip cookies still warm from the oven, "I want you boys to take these with you." "Mrs. Morrison, you don't need to." "Hush," she interrupted, pressing the plate into Steele's hands. "It's the least I can do." Harold cleared his throat, holding a small, wrapped package. "Actually, we have something else for you, Marcus." Steele accepted the gift hesitantly. Inside the tissue paper lay Harold's Purple Heart medal, its ribbon freshly cleaned and carefully preserved. "Harold, I can't accept this." "Yes, you can, and you will." Harold's voice carried military authority. "That medal represents service above self, putting others' needs before your own safety and comfort. You've earned the right to carry it, but it's yours. You bled for this, and you've bled for others since then. Maybe not in war, but in all the ways that matter. Take it, son. Keep it as a reminder that heroism comes in many forms." Steele stared at the medal, overwhelmed by the weight of Harold's gesture. In his hands lay not just a piece of metal, but acceptance, respect, and recognition of his transformation. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll keep being the man we've come to know," Betty suggested gently. A knock at the front door interrupted the moment. Harold opened it to find Sheriff Clayton standing on the porch, his expression unreadable. "Evening, Harold, Betty, gentlemen." Clayton nodded to the bikers. "Sheriff?" Steele replied wearily. "Problem?" "Actually, the opposite of a problem." Clayton stepped inside, removing his hat. "Got a call from County Inspector Williams this afternoon. He wanted to commend the quality of work done here." "That's nice to hear," Harold said. He also mentioned that Jake Jenkins filed a complaint alleging code violations and unsafe construction practices. Clayton paused dramatically. Turns out Jenkins was wrong on every count. Steele remained silent, letting the sheriff continue. "Williams said this is some of the finest residential construction he's inspected in 15 years. Better than most professional crews produce. We know what we're doing," Diesel said simply. Clayton studied the transformed house with obvious approval. "Clearly. Which brings me to why I'm here." He pulled out an official-looking document. "The county commissioners asked me to deliver this personally." Harold accepted the paper, scanning its contents with growing surprise. It's a commendation for exceptional community service and voluntary assistance to storm victims. All 4 of you, Clayton confirmed, addressing the bikers. Official recognition from the county for going above and beyond to help neighbors in need. Betty clasped her hands together, beaming with pride. Oh, Marcus, that's wonderful. Steele looked uncomfortable with the attention. Sheriff, we just helped rebuild a house. Mr. Rodriguez, you did considerably more than that. You changed how this community thinks about second chances and judging people by their actions rather than their appearance. Suddenly, Harold grimaced and clutched his chest, his face going pale. The stress and excitement of the evening, combined with days of physical exertion beyond his usual capacity, had pushed his 78-year-old heart past its limits. "Harold!" Betty cried out as her husband swayed and reached for support. Steele moved with military precision, catching Harold before he could fall and easing him into a chair. "Diesel, call 911. Patch, get my first aid kit from the bike. Hawk, clear a path to the front door." Steele knelt beside Harold, checking his pulse and breathing with practiced efficiency. "Harold, stay with me. You're going to be fine." "Can't breathe," Harold gasped. "Yes, you can. Slow, steady breaths. Focus on my voice." Steele's combat medic training kicked in automatically. "Betty, get his medications. Any heart pills, blood thinners, anything cardiac-related." Sheriff Clayton assisted Betty in gathering Harold's medications, while the bikers transformed into an emergency response team. Their coordinated action spoke of shared training and experience in crisis situations. "Ambulance is 3 minutes out," Diesel reported. Steele continued monitoring Harold's vital signs, providing reassurance while watching for signs of deterioration. "Harold, you're doing great. Just keep breathing steady." Betty knelt beside her husband, holding his hand while tears streamed down her face. "Don't you dare leave me now, Harold Morrison. Not after everything we've been through." "Not going anywhere," Harold whispered, managing a weak smile. "Too stubborn." The hospital waiting room filled with an unlikely gathering as word spread about Harold's condition. Steele and his brothers occupied one corner, their leather vests drawing curious stares from other visitors. Betty sat between Steele and Sheriff Clayton, clutching a cup of coffee she hadn't touched in 2 hours. Dr. Martinez emerged from the cardiac unit, still wearing surgical scrubs. "Mrs. Morrison." Betty rose shakily, Steele's steady hand supporting her elbow. "How is he?" "Your husband suffered a mild myocardial infarction, a heart attack. We've stabilized him, but he'll need surgery to place 2 stents in blocked arteries." "Surgery?" Betty's voice trembled. "Minimally invasive procedure. We'll insert tiny mesh tubes to keep the arteries open. He should make a full recovery, but it'll require some lifestyle changes." Steele stepped forward. "Doctor, what kind of restrictions will he have during recovery?" Dr. Martinez studied Steele's Hell's Angels colors with obvious surprise. "Are you family?" "These gentlemen are the reason Harold's alive," Betty said firmly. Marcus knew exactly what to do when Harold collapsed. "Your quick response definitely made a difference," Dr. Martinez acknowledged. "You have medical training? Army combat medic, overseas deployment, seen my share of cardiac events. Then you understand the recovery process. No heavy lifting for 6 weeks, limited physical activity, careful monitoring of medications and diet." Betty's face crumpled. "The house. There's still so much work to finish." "Mrs. Morrison," Diesel said gently, "don't worry about the house. We'll handle whatever needs doing." Dr. Martinez looked confused. "I'm sorry. What house?" Sheriff Clayton explained. These men have been helping the Morrisons rebuild after storm damage. Volunteer work, all done properly and with permits. Volunteer work? Dr. Martinez studied the bikers with new interest. That's unusual. Unusual times call for unusual solutions, Steele replied. A commotion in the hallway announced the arrival of Harold and Betty's son. David Morrison, 52, had driven 4 hours after receiving Betty's frantic phone call. He burst into the waiting room, spotted his mother, and rushed to embrace her. "Mom, what happened? Is Dad okay?" "He's stable, honey. These gentlemen saved his life." Betty gestured toward Steele and his brothers. David studied the Hells Angels with obvious suspicion. "What gentlemen?" Sheriff Clayton intervened. "David, your parents' house was severely damaged in last week's storm. These men have been helping with reconstruction." "Helping how?" "Complete rebuilding," Betty explained. "New roof, electrical, plumbing, structural reinforcement. Marcus and his friends have worked for 6 days straight, asking for nothing in return." David looked between his mother and the intimidating bikers, struggling to process information that didn't fit his preconceptions. "Mom, are you sure about this?" "David Morrison, I raised you better than to judge people by their appearance." Betty's teacher voice emerged, sharp with disappointment. "These men have shown your father and me more kindness than anyone else since the storm hit." Steele stood up, recognizing family dynamics that needed space to develop. "Mrs. Morrison, we should probably head out. Let you spend time with family." "Absolutely not," Betty said firmly. "You're not going anywhere until I know Harold's going to be fine." "Ma'am, we can wait outside." "You'll wait right here where I can see you. After everything you've done for us. You're family now." David pulled his mother aside for a private conversation. "Mom, I'm concerned about these people. Hell's Angels have a reputation." "So did your father when I first met him. Wild motorcycle, leather jacket. Everyone said he was trouble. Look how that turned out." "That's different." "Is it? Marcus served his country same as your father. He has skills, education, and more integrity than most people I've known. Don't you dare embarrass me by treating him poorly." Dr. Martinez returned with additional updates. "Mrs. Morrison, your husband is awake and asking for you. He can have visitors, but just family for now." "Doctor," Betty said, "I'd like Marcus to come with me. Harold will want to see him." David started to protest, but Betty's expression stopped him cold. In the cardiac recovery room, Harold looked pale but alert, as connected to monitors that beeped reassuringly. His face brightened when he saw Steele enter with Betty. "Marcus, you saved my life." "Just did what needed doing. How you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck. Doctor says I need stents." "Good thing. Get you fixed up properly." Steele approached the bed, noting Harold's improved color and steady heart rhythm on the monitors. Harold reached for Steele's hand, gripping it with surprising strength. "Marcus, I need you to promise me something." "Anything." "If something happens to me, look after Betty. She's got our son, but David lives 4 hours away. She'll need someone nearby." "Harold, you're going to be fine. Doctor said full recovery. Promise me anyway." Steele looked at this elderly man who'd become more than a neighbor, more than a friend. Harold represented the kind of person Steele had spent years protecting in uniform, then forgotten about in civilian life. "I promise, but you're going to be around to hold me to it." Harold smiled, settling back against his pillows. "Good. Now go take care of my wife. She's been worrying herself sick." 2 weeks after Harold's surgery, the Morrison home had become an unexpected community gathering place. What began as a simple reconstruction project had evolved into something the small town had never experienced, a bridge between worlds that traditionally remained separate. Steele arrived each morning to check on Harold's recovery and help with tasks Betty couldn't manage alone. Today, he found Town Council Chairman Robert Hayes parking his sedan in the driveway, official documents tucked under his arm. "Mr. Rodriguez," Hayes greeted him formally. "I was hoping to speak with you and the Morrisons." "They're on the back porch. Harold's feeling stronger today." Hayes followed Steele through the house, noting the professional quality of the reconstruction work. Every detail spoke of craftsmanship and care. Crown molding properly mitered, electrical outlets positioned precisely, hardwood floors refinished to match the original. On the back porch, Harold sat in his favorite chair, while Betty tended her recovered flower garden. The new deck Steele's crew had built provided perfect views of the countryside and enough space for entertaining visitors. "Mr. Hayes," Harold greeted the council chairman. "Good to see you." "Harold, Betty, I hope you're feeling better." "Much better, thanks to good medical care and better friends," Harold replied, nodding toward Steele. Hayes opened his folder and withdrew an official resolution. "I'm here on behalf of the town council. We've been discussing your situation and the assistance you've received." Betty tensed, fearing more red tape complications. "Is there a problem?" "Quite the opposite." The council voted unanimously to formally recognize the exceptional community service provided by Mr. Rodriguez and his associates. He handed Harold the resolution, which proclaimed Steele, Diesel, Patch, and Hawk honorary citizens of the town, with special recognition for selfless service, above and beyond normal community expectations. "There's more," Hayes continued. "We're also establishing a community emergency response fund, with these gentlemen as founding advisors. When natural disasters or similar emergencies affect residents, we'll have resources and expertise available for immediate assistance." Steele looked skeptical. "Mr. Hayes, we appreciate the recognition, but we're not looking for official positions or ongoing responsibilities. Mr. Rodriguez, what you and your friends accomplished here has changed how our community thinks about helping neighbors. We want to make sure that spirit continues." Harold leaned forward in his chair. "What exactly are you proposing?" "A formal partnership. When storms, fires, or other emergencies damage homes, affected families could request assistance from a trained volunteer response team. Materials funded through the emergency fund, labor provided by skilled volunteers, led by people like Marcus and his brothers," Betty added, understanding the implications. "They've proven that coordinated volunteer effort can accomplish more than traditional contractor-based responses, especially for elderly or fixed-income residents." "Exactly," Hayes confirmed. Steele considered the proposal while watching Harold's face light up with enthusiasm. The old Marine was already thinking tactically, planning how to organize and coordinate community disaster response. "What would this involve?" Steele asked. "Training sessions for interested volunteers, pre-positioned emergency supplies, coordination with county emergency services. Nothing too formal, but organized enough to be effective." A pickup truck pulled into the driveway, followed by 2 more vehicles. Tom Bradley emerged from the hardware store truck, accompanied by Sheriff Clayton and several neighbors Steele recognized from recent days. "Looks like word got out about this meeting," Hayes observed. The group gathered on the new deck, creating an impromptu town hall discussion. Bradley carried a folder thick with papers. "Marcus," Bradley said, "I've been talking with other business owners about this emergency response idea. We want to contribute." contribute how. Discounted materials for emergency repairs, priority ordering for disaster supplies, equipment loans when needed. The whole business community wants to support this. Sheriff Clayton stepped forward. County emergency services are interested too. We could use local volunteers with construction skills for disaster response. Your crew proved they can work fast and efficiently. Mrs. Patterson appeared from next door, carrying a covered dish and wearing the expression of someone ready to admit she'd been wrong about her assumptions. "Mrs. Morrison," she called out, "I brought casserole for Harold. And, Mr. Rodriguez, I owe you an apology." "No apology needed, ma'am." "Yes, there is. I judged you unfairly, based on appearance rather than character. My husband says I should know better at my age." Betty smiled, recognizing a breakthrough moment. "Mrs. Patterson, would you like to join us? We're discussing community improvements." As the informal meeting continued, Steele found himself at the center of conversations about emergency preparedness, volunteer coordination, and community resilience. Topics he'd never expected to discuss with town council members and business leaders. "Marcus," Harold said quietly during a lull in conversation. "What do you think? Ready to become an official pillar of the community?" Steele looked around the deck at faces that had transformed from suspicious to accepting, to genuinely welcoming. 6 months ago, these people crossed the street to avoid him. Today, they were asking for his leadership in community service. "Guess stranger things have happened," he replied, fingering Harold's Purple Heart in his pocket. "Not much stranger," Harold chuckled, "but definitely not stranger." 3 weeks later, Steele's phone rang at 6 o'clock in the morning. The voice belonged to Mrs. Chen, an elderly widow whose small house had suffered roof damage during the previous night's hailstorm. "Mr. Rodriguez, I'm sorry to bother you so early, but my ceiling is leaking terribly. Sheriff Clayton gave me your number." "No bother, Mrs. Chen. We'll be right over." Steele called Diesel, Patch, and Hawk, activating the informal emergency response network they'd established. Within an hour, 4 motorcycles were parked outside Mrs. Chen's modest home, and a blue tarp covered the damaged section of roof. "How extensive is the damage?" Harold asked, arriving in his pickup truck despite Betty's protests about him driving so soon after surgery. "Manageable," Hawk replied, examining the roof structure. "Dozen shingles, some flashing, couple of damaged rafters. Day's work at most." "I can help with cleanup," Harold offered. "Doctor's orders were light duty only." Steele reminded him, "You can supervise and make sure we do things right." Harold grumbled, but accepted the compromise. His recovery was progressing well, but Betty had threatened dire consequences if he overexerted himself again. By noon, word had spread through the community about the Chen house repair. Tom Bradley arrived with donated materials. Mrs. Patterson brought lunch for the work crew, and several neighbors offered to help with cleanup. "This is remarkable," observed Sarah Williams, 34, the town's elementary school teacher who'd come to check on Mrs. Chen. "I've never seen community response organized so quickly." Steele looked up from his roofing work. "When people need help, you help. Simple as that." Sarah studied Steele with obvious interest. She'd heard stories about the Hells Angels reconstruction project, but hadn't met any of the bikers personally. Reality differed significantly from her expectations. "You're not what I expected," she admitted. "What did you expect?" "Honestly, scary, intimidating men who cause trouble wherever they go. Sometimes we are. Today, we're just neighbors helping neighbors." Sarah watched Steele work with practiced efficiency, noting his careful attention to detail and obvious concern for Mrs. Chen's comfort. His massive hands handled delicate roof, flashing with surprising gentleness. "Are you the one who saved Harold Morrison's life?" "Just happened to be there when he needed help." "Mrs. Morrison says you're a hero." Steele paused in his work, uncomfortable with the label. "Heroes are people who do extraordinary things in impossible situations. I just did ordinary things when someone needed help." Maybe that's exactly what heroism is. The observation stayed with Steele as the afternoon wore on. Sarah remained at the job site, helping with cleanup and engaging in easy conversation with the work crew. She treated the bikers as skilled professionals rather than dangerous criminals, asking technical questions about construction and showing genuine interest in their backgrounds. "Sarah?" Mrs. Chen called from her kitchen window. "Would you ask those nice men if they'd like some iced tea?" "Mrs. Chen wants to know if you'd like refreshments," Sarah relayed. "That would be great," Diesel replied, wiping sweat from his forehead. In the kitchen, Sarah helped Mrs. Chen prepare drinks while observing the efficient coordination outside. The bikers worked as a seamless team, anticipating each other's needs and maintaining constant communication about progress and safety. "They're very professional," Sarah commented. "Oh, yes, dear. Marcus organized emergency response when my hot water heater flooded the basement last week. Had it fixed and cleanup completed in one afternoon." Emergency response. The town council established a volunteer program. When residents have emergencies, these gentlemen coordinate assistance much faster than waiting for contractors. Sarah absorbed this information with growing interest. As a teacher, she understood the value of community resources that could respond quickly to residents' needs. "Mrs. Chen, how many families have they helped?" 7 or 8, I think. Roof repairs, plumbing emergencies, electrical problems, always professional, always respectful, never asking for payment. Outside, Steele was finishing the final section of roofing when Sarah emerged with iced tea. She handed him a glass, noting the careful way he climbed down from the roof to accept it. "Thank you. That hits the spot. Mrs. Chen says you've helped several families recently. Word gets around when people need assistance. We try to respond when we can. What made you decide to do this kind of community service?" Steele considered the question while watching his brothers complete their work. "Guess I got tired of being part of the problem. Figured it was time to be part of the solution. That's a significant change. Sometimes life gives you opportunities to be different than you were. Smart people take those opportunities." Sarah studied Steele's face, recognizing sincerity beneath the weathered exterior. "I teach 3rd grade at the elementary school. We're always looking for community volunteers to talk with students about different careers and life experiences. You want a Hell's Angel to talk to 8-year-olds? I want someone who understands that people can change, that everyone deserves second chances, and that helping others is important. Your motorcycle club affiliation is just interesting background." Steele finished his iced tea, considering Sarah's unexpected invitation. "Let me think about it." "Of course. Take your time." As the work crew packed their tools and prepared to leave, Sarah found herself hoping Steele would accept her invitation. Something about his quiet competence and obvious dedication to helping others suggested he might have important lessons to share with her students. The reporter from the Regional Herald arrived on a Tuesday morning, just as Steele was teaching neighborhood kids basic tool safety in Harold's garage. Jennifer Walsh, a veteran journalist with 20 years of experience covering small-town stories, had heard rumors about Hell's Angels providing community service and came to investigate. "Mr. Rodriguez," she called out, her camera hanging ready around her neck. Steele looked up from demonstrating proper hammer technique to 12-year-old Tommy Bradley. "That's me. Jennifer Walsh, Regional Herald. I'd like to talk with you about your community service activities." The children gathered around Steele looked between him and the reporter with obvious curiosity. Tommy raised his hand like he was in school. "Mr. Steele, are you going to be famous?" "Probably not, buddy. Just talking to a lady about the work we've been doing around town." Jennifer pulled out her notebook and recorder. "Would you mind if I observed your session with the children? I'm interested in how this community outreach developed." "Kids, what do you think?" "Okay if the reporter lady watches while we learn about tools." The children nodded enthusiastically, excited by the prospect of being part of a newspaper story. For the next hour, Jennifer observed Steele patiently teaching proper tool handling, safety procedures, and basic construction principles to an eager group of young students. His teaching method combined gentle correction with encouraging praise, treating each child's questions with serious attention. "Why do you always wear safety glasses, Mr. Steele?" asked 8-year-old Emma Patterson. "Because eyes don't grow back." "Sweetheart, tools can be dangerous if you don't respect them, but they're also amazing when you use them properly." Jennifer noticed how Steele modified his explanations for different age levels, ensuring that younger children understood safety concepts while challenging older kids with more complex techniques. "This is remarkable," she told Harold, who was supervising from his lawn chair. "I've never seen anything like this." "Marcus has a gift with children," Harold replied. "They trust him because he treats them like capable people instead of just kids." After the lesson ended and the children departed with promises to practice what they'd learned, Jennifer sat down with Steele for a formal interview. "Mr. Rodriguez, tell me how this community service program started." Steele recounted the story of finding Harold and Betty struggling with storm damage, the decision to help, and the gradual expansion into organized emergency response. "What motivated you to take that first step?" "Saw people who needed help, had the skills to provide it, seemed like the right thing to do. But you must understand how unusual this appears. Hell's Angels don't typically engage in community service. Maybe they should. Maybe everyone should look for ways to help instead of ways to take." Jennifer scribbled notes rapidly. "Have you faced resistance from community members who were suspicious of your motives? Some people judge based on appearance and reputation. Can't blame them for being cautious. How did you overcome that suspicion? Showed up, did good work, who treated people with respect. Actions speak louder than explanations." Betty appeared with fresh lemonade, greeting Jennifer warmly. "I hope Marcus is telling you how wonderful he and his friends have been for our community. Mrs. Morrison, what was your initial reaction when you saw Hell's Angels working on your property?" "Gratitude," Betty replied without hesitation. "These men appeared when we needed help most, and asked for nothing in return except the chance to serve." Jennifer interviewed several community members throughout the afternoon, collecting perspectives from town council members, business owners, and families who'd received assistance from Steele's volunteer crew. "It's changed how we think about problem solving," Tom Bradley explained. "Instead of waiting for outside contractors or government assistance, we organize local resources to help each other." Sheriff Clayton provided official perspective. "Crime rates haven't changed, but community cohesion has improved dramatically. People feel more connected, more willing to help neighbors." Sarah Williams, whom Jennifer interviewed at the elementary school, offered educational insights. Marcus visits our classroom monthly now, teaching children about construction, teamwork, and service to others. He's become one of our most popular guest speakers. Does his Hells Angels affiliation concern parents? Initially, yes. But once they see him interact with their children, the patience, respect, and genuine care he shows, those concerns disappear quickly. Jennifer's final interview was with County Emergency Services Director Mike Stevens, who explained how Steele's volunteer team had been integrated into official disaster response protocols. These men respond faster than traditional contractors, work for free, and maintain professional standards that exceed most commercial operations. They've become essential to our emergency preparedness. That evening, Jennifer reviewed her notes and recordings at the local diner. Every person she'd interviewed told the same story. 4. Hells Angels had transformed community disaster response through skilled volunteer service, changing perceptions about both motorcycle clubs and the power of neighbors helping neighbors. Her editor would be skeptical, Jennifer knew. The story defied conventional wisdom about outlaw motorcycle clubs, but the evidence was overwhelming. These men had discovered something powerful in community service, and their example was inspiring others to follow. Small-town Hells Angels transform community through service, she wrote in her lead paragraph. It sounded impossible, but sometimes the impossible was exactly what made the best stories. The article would run on Sunday's front page, bringing regional attention to a small town's unlikely heroes and their quiet revolution in community cooperation. Steele sat alone in his small apartment above Murphy's garage, staring at the newspaper article spread across his kitchen table. The headline read, "Small Town Hells Angels Transform. Community Through Service," and beneath it was a photograph of him teaching children proper tool safety in Harold's garage. He barely recognized himself in the image. Focused, patient, genuinely happy. When had he become this person? When had helping others replace the anger and resentment that had driven him for so many years? His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. "Marcus, it's Harold. You see the paper this morning?" "Reading it now." "Betty's over the moon. She's already called 3 people to make sure they saw the article." Steele traced the words of a quote attributed to him. "Actions speak louder than explanations." He'd meant those words, but seeing them in print made them feel more significant somehow. "Harold, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "How do you know when you've really changed? When you're not just pretending to be someone different?" Harold paused, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Marcus, you've been showing up every day for 2 months, not because you had to, not because someone was watching, but because people needed help and you had something to give. That's not pretending. That's character." After hanging up, Steele walked to his bathroom mirror and studied his reflection. The same scars marked his face, the same tattoos covered his arms, but something fundamental had shifted in his eyes. The hardness remained, but it was softened now by something he thought he'd lost forever: purpose. His journal lay open on the bedside table, filled with observations he'd been recording since the Morrison project began. He read his own words from 3 weeks ago. "Betty Morrison called me 'son' today while I was fixing her garbage disposal. Can't remember the last time someone used that word about me with affection instead of disappointment. Made me think about the mother I lost when I was 16. How proud she might have been if she could see me helping instead of hurting." The entries chronicled his gradual transformation through small moments of connection, children trusting him with tools, elderly residents inviting him for coffee, neighbors waving instead of crossing the street when they saw him coming. A knock at his door interrupted his reading. Through the peephole, he saw Sarah Williams holding a covered dish and wearing the expression of someone who'd made a decision. "Sarah, everything okay? I brought dinner. Thought you might be tired of takeout and frozen meals." Steele accepted the casserole dish, touched by the unexpected gesture. "That's really kind. Would you like to come in?" His apartment was sparse but clean, military precision applied to civilian living. Sarah noticed the newspaper article prominently displayed on the table, along with what appeared to be a handwritten journal. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I wanted to tell you something." "What's that?" "My students have been talking about you all week. Not just about the tool lessons, but about what you represent. The idea that people can change, that everyone deserves second chances." Steele poured coffee while Sarah continued. "Tommy Bradley told his mother he wants to be a helper man like Mr. Steele when he grows up. Emma Patterson drew a picture of you teaching her to use a screwdriver safely. These children see you as a hero." "I'm not a hero, Sarah. I'm just trying to make up for lost time." "Maybe that's exactly what heroism is, choosing to be better than you were, even when it's difficult." Sarah noticed the journal open on the table. "Do you mind me asking what you're writing?" "Trying to understand how I got from there to here," Steele replied, gesturing at the pages, "documenting the process of becoming someone I can respect." "May I read some of it?" Steele hesitated, then handed her the journal. Sarah read several entries, her expression growing more thoughtful with each page. "Marcus, this is remarkable. You're writing about a genuine transformation, not just in your actions, but in your fundamental understanding of yourself and your place in the world. Sometimes I wonder if it's real or if I'm just fooling myself. What does your heart tell you?" Steele considered the question while watching Sarah read his private thoughts. Her presence in his small apartment felt natural, or comfortable in a way he hadn't experienced with anyone since his military service. "My heart tells me I found something worth protecting, this community, these relationships, this version of myself that actually has value." Sarah closed the journal and looked directly at him. "Marcus, I've been thinking about us, about the possibility of us. Sarah, let me finish. I know your past, your reputation, the assumptions people make. I also know the man who teaches children patiently, who saves lives during medical emergencies, who rebuilds homes without expecting payment." Steele felt something shift inside his chest. Hope, maybe, or the possibility of love he'd thought was beyond his reach. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'd like to find out who we could be together, if you're interested." Steele looked at this remarkable woman who saw past his exterior to the person he was becoming, and for the first time in years, he believed in the possibility of a future built on something other than regret. 6 months after the Morrison House reconstruction, the entire community gathered on Harold and Betty's newly completed deck for what had become an informal tradition, a celebration dinner to mark the official completion of their home restoration project. String lights hung between the new pergola posts Steele had installed, casting warm light over tables laden with covered dishes contributed by neighbors. The guest list included everyone who had participated in the transformation, from Tom Bradley and Sheriff Clayton to Mrs. Patterson and her husband. Steele stood at the deck railing, watching the sunset paint the sky in the shades of orange and pink. In his hand, he held a small velvet box containing an engagement ring he'd purchased that afternoon. Sarah was inside helping Betty organize the buffet, unaware of the question he planned to ask before the evening ended. "Nervous?" Harold asked, joining him at the railing. "Shows that much?" "Only to someone who's been in your shoes. I remember the night I proposed to Betty. Thought I might pass out from nerves." Steele fingered the ring box in his pocket. "What if she says no?" "Then she says no, and you respect her decision. But Marcus, I've watched that woman look at you for 6 months. She's not going to say no." A car pulled into the driveway, and Steele was surprised to see his probation officer, James Carter, emerging with his wife and teenage daughter. Steele had maintained perfect compliance with all requirements, but Carter's presence at a social gathering was unexpected. "Mr. Rodriguez," Carter approached with an envelope in his hand. "I hope you don't mind me interrupting your celebration." "No problem, Mr. Carter. What can I do for you?" "Actually, it's what you've already done." Carter opened the envelope and pulled out official documents. "Your probation period ended last week. These are your discharge papers." Steele stared at the paperwork that officially closed the legal chapter of his troubled past. "Early discharge," Carter explained. "Exemplary compliance, outstanding community service record, 0 violations or incidents. The court agreed that continued supervision was unnecessary." Betty appeared at Steele's elbow, having overheard the conversation. "Marcus, that's wonderful news." "More than that," Carter continued. "The State Parole Board wants to use your community service program as a model for other jurisdictions. They're asking if you'd be willing to consult on developing similar programs elsewhere." Harold clapped Steele on the shoulder. "From probationer to consultant, that's quite a journey." As the evening progressed, Steele found himself at the center of conversations about expanding the emergency response program, training additional volunteers, and possibly establishing a nonprofit organization to coordinate disaster relief efforts throughout the county. "Marcus," Town Council Chairman Hayes said during dinner, "we've been discussing a formal proposal. The county wants to hire you as emergency response coordinator. Full-time position, benefits, official recognition of the work you're already doing." "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Hayes, but I'm not sure I'm ready for that kind of responsibility. You've been handling that responsibility for months already. We're just offering to make it official and compensate you properly." Sarah squeezed Steele's hand under the table, her expression encouraging. "It's a wonderful opportunity, Marcus." "Think about it," Hayes continued. "Your answer doesn't have to be immediate." As dinner wound down and guests began clearing dishes, Steele walked Sarah to the edge of the garden where Harold's prize roses bloomed in the gathering darkness. "Sarah, this has been quite a day. The job offer is incredible. You'd be perfect for that position." "Actually, I wanted to talk about something else." Steele dropped to one knee, pulling out the ring box as Sarah's hands flew to her mouth in surprise. "Sarah Williams, 6 months ago, I was a man with a criminal record and no hope for the future. You saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. You believed I could change before I believed it myself." Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she nodded for him to continue. "You've made me want to be worthy of love, worthy of trust, worthy of the future we could build together. Will you marry me?" "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes. Of course, yes." As Steele slipped the ring onto her finger, applause erupted from the deck where the remaining guests had been watching discreetly. Betty wiped tears from her eyes while Harold raised his coffee cup in a toast. "To new beginnings," Harold called out. "To second chances," Sheriff Clayton added. "To family," Betty concluded. raising her own cup toward the couple in the garden. Later, as the last guests departed and cleanup was completed, Steele and Sarah sat alone on the deck steps where this entire journey had begun. "Harold's right, you know," Sarah said, admiring her engagement ring in the moonlight. "About what?" "This is about much more than rebuilding a house. You've rebuilt yourself, rebuilt relationships with this community, rebuilt hope for people who thought change was impossible." Steele looked at the house that had become the symbol of his transformation, solid, beautiful, built to last through whatever storms the future might bring. "Think we can build something that strong together?" he asked. "I think we already have," Sarah replied, taking his hand as they planned their future under the stars. 1 year after the Morrison House reconstruction, Steele stood before the county courthouse holding a folder of incorporation documents for the Community Emergency Response Alliance, a nonprofit organization that had grown from 4 bikers helping one family into a regional model for disaster relief. Diesel, Patch, and Hawk flanked him as they climbed the courthouse steps, all wearing business casual clothes instead of their usual leather vests. Today marked the official transition from informal volunteer group to legitimate charitable organization with tax-exempt status and county funding. "Never thought I'd be filing nonprofit paperwork," Patch muttered, adjusting his unaccustomed tie. "Never thought a lot of things," Steele replied, thinking about the engagement ring on Sarah's finger and the job offer he'd accepted as Regional Emergency Response Coordinator. Inside the courthouse, they met with County Administrator Janet Phillips, who'd been instrumental in securing funding and official recognition for their program. "Gentlemen, this is a historic day. Your organization is the first volunteer emergency response group to receive county endorsement and funding in our region's history." She handed Steele the official charter documents, signed and sealed with county approval. "You're now authorized to coordinate disaster response efforts, train volunteers, and represent the county in mutual aid agreements with neighboring jurisdictions." "What does that mean practically?" Diesel asked. "It means when the next storm hits anywhere in a 3-county area, your team leads the response. Full legal authority, budget for materials and equipment, access to county emergency resources." Steele studied the documents that transformed them from well-meaning amateurs into professional emergency responders. The responsibility felt enormous. "Miss Phillips, we're honored by the trust you're placing in us. You've earned it. 43 families assisted, 0 safety incidents, 100% satisfaction rating from aid recipients. Those numbers speak for themselves." After the courthouse ceremony, the 4 men drove to the Morrison property for a barbecue celebration. Harold had insisted on hosting, despite Betty's concerns about him overdoing the preparations. "Marcus," Harold called from the deck, wearing an apron that read, "Kiss the Cook," and wielding grilling tongs with obvious enthusiasm. "How did it go?" "We're official," Steele replied, displaying the charter documents. "County Authorized Emergency Response Organization." "Outstanding!" Harold beamed with fatherly pride. "I knew you boys would make something special out of this." Sarah emerged from the kitchen carrying a covered dish, her engagement ring catching sunlight as she moved. The incorporation paperwork came through. "All signed and sealed. We're legitimate do-gooders now. You were always legitimate do-gooders. Now you just have the paperwork to prove it." Betty appeared with iced tea, moving more slowly than usual, but insisting on contributing to the celebration. "Marcus, dear, have you given more thought to Harold's suggestion about expanding the program?" Harold had been advocating for establishing similar chapters in other communities. Well, using their success as a template for broader regional coverage. Several Hells Angels groups from neighboring areas had expressed interest after hearing about their work. Actually, I have news about that. Steele pulled out his phone and showed them an email. Got a message from the Iron Hawks chapter in Pine Valley. They want to start their own community service program. That's wonderful. Betty clapped her hands together. There's more. The State Hells Angels organization wants to make community service an official part of membership requirements. Instead of just riding and partying, chapters would be expected to contribute meaningful volunteer work to their communities. Diesel whistled appreciatively. That could change everything about how people perceive the club. Could change everything about how we perceive ourselves, Hawk added. As the afternoon progressed, other guests arrived for the celebration. Sheriff Clayton brought his family. Tom Bradley closed his store early to attend, and even Mrs. Patterson appeared with homemade cookies and compliments for Steele's organizational skills. "Marcus," she said, "I want to apologize again for my initial reaction when you first appeared in our neighborhood." "Mrs. Patterson, no apology necessary. You were protecting your community the best way you knew how." "Perhaps, but I learned something important from watching you work. Sometimes protection comes from unexpected places." Dr. Martinez, who treated Harold during his heart attack, arrived with news that surprised everyone. "Mr. Rodriguez, I have a proposal from the hospital administration." "What kind of proposal?" "We'd like to train you and your team in advanced first aid and emergency medical response. With your rapid response capabilities and community connections, you could provide critical medical assistance during disasters." "Medical training." "EMT certification, basic trauma response, emergency stabilization techniques. You already saved Mr. Morrison's life with basic first aid knowledge. Imagine what you could accomplish with proper training." Steele looked around the deck at faces filled with encouragement and support. A year ago, he'd been a troubled ex-soldier with a criminal record and no prospects. Today, he was engaged to a wonderful woman, leading a successful nonprofit organization, and being offered opportunities to expand his ability to help others. "Dr. Martinez, when do we start?" "Next month, if you're interested. The hospital will provide training, certification, and ongoing education." Harold raised his beer bottle in a toast. "To the Community Emergency Response Alliance, and to second chances that become first-class opportunities." As the celebration continued into the evening, Steele reflected on the charter documents in his pocket. Official recognition that 4 Hells Angels had become community leaders through the simple act of helping neighbors in need. 2 years later, on a crisp October morning, Steele stood before a bronze plaque mounted on the front porch of the Morrison home. The inscription read, "In recognition of the power of unexpected kindness and the strength found in community unity, and dedicated to Harold and Betty Morrison, and to all who believe that helping neighbors is the highest form of service." Harold sat in his favorite chair on the deck, his recovery complete, and his spirits high as he watched his neighborhood bustle with activity. The annual Community Helper Day had grown into a town-wide celebration, bringing together volunteers from 3 counties to assist elderly residents, single parents, and anyone facing home maintenance challenges they couldn't handle alone. "Hard to believe it all started with a leaky roof," Harold mused as Steele joined him on the deck. "Started with good people willing to help," Steele corrected, adjusting his new wedding ring. He and Sarah had married 6 months earlier in a ceremony held right here in Harold and Betty's backyard. Betty emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray of fresh coffee and the satisfied expression of someone watching a dream come true. At 77, she moved with the energy of someone who'd found new purpose in organizing community events and mentoring young families. Marcus, dear, Channel 8 News is here to film the memorial plaque ceremony. They want to interview you about the expansion program. The Community Emergency Response Alliance now operated in 12 counties with over 200 trained volunteers and partnerships with professional emergency services throughout the region. Steele's original Hell's Angels chapter had been officially renamed the Community Service Division, and similar transformations were occurring in motorcycle clubs across 3 states. Mrs. Morrison, I still get nervous talking to reporters. Nonsense. You've spoken at conferences, trained emergency responders, and testified before the state legislature about volunteer disaster relief. A simple interview should be easy by now. Sarah appeared from inside the house, her elementary school students following in an excited parade. She'd brought her 3rd grade class to participate in the plaque dedication ceremony and learn about community service. "Mr. Steele," called Tommy Bradley, now 10 years old and Steele's unofficial apprentice in basic construction skills. "My mom says you're going to teach us about building birdhouses today." "That's right, buddy. But first, we have to listen to some speeches about why helping neighbors is important." "We already know why," piped up Emma Patterson. "Because when people help each other, everyone's life gets better." Steele smiled at the simple wisdom of children who'd grown up seeing community cooperation as normal rather than exceptional. County Commissioner Hayes approached the group, carrying a folder thick with official documents. "Marcus, before we start the ceremony, I have some news from the state capitol." "What kind of news?" "The governor wants to nominate you for the State Medal of Service, highest civilian honor for community contribution. The nomination is based on your organization's disaster response record and its influence on volunteer programs statewide." Harold beamed with pride. "Marcus, that's incredible recognition." "It's recognition for all of us," Steele corrected. "None of this would have happened without community support." As the ceremony began, Steele found himself surrounded by faces that told the story of transformation, not just his own, but an entire community's evolution from suspicion and isolation to cooperation and mutual support. Dazzle, now married to a local nurse and operating his own emergency response training center, served as master of ceremonies. Patch had been elected to the town council, bringing his electrical expertise to municipal planning. Hawk had opened a construction company specializing in disaster-resistant building techniques. Sheriff Clayton stepped to the microphone to address the gathered crowd. 2 years ago, 4 men on motorcycles stopped to help elderly neighbors with storm damage. Today, we're dedicating a memorial to the principle that extraordinary change begins with ordinary kindness. As applause filled the autumn air, Steele looked across the crowd at Sarah, who was helping her students understand the significance of the ceremony. Their wedding photo sat prominently on Betty's mantelpiece inside, next to images of all the families they'd helped and volunteers they'd trained. "Before we unveil the plaque," Betty said, taking the microphone, "I want to say something to Marcus and his brothers. You gave us back our home, but more importantly, you gave our community back its heart." She pulled a cord, revealing the bronze plaque that would permanently commemorate the day 4 Hell's Angels learned that true strength comes not from intimidation, but from lifting others up. Steele read the inscription one more time, thinking about Harold's purple heart he still carried in his wallet, Sarah's belief in second chances, and Betty's motherly acceptance of a lost soul who'd found his way home through service to others. Sometimes, he said quietly to Harold, the best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in helping other people. Harold nodded, watching neighborhood children play on the deck he and Steele had built together. Sometimes the family you choose becomes stronger than the family you're born into. As the celebration continued around them, Steele realized that the scared, angry young man who'd left the military 15 years ago had finally found what he'd been searching for: a place to belong, people to protect, and a purpose worth living for. The bronze plaque gleamed in the autumn sunlight, marking not just a house rebuilt, but lives transformed through the simple act of neighbors helping neighbors. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.